So to start off, good evening. Again, thank you so much for coming to this Spotlight PA live event on Pennsylvania's upcoming Supreme Court primary election and just the politics of courts today. I'm Katie Meyer. I'm the government reporter and editor for Spotlight PA. I'm so glad you could all join us this evening. Events like these would not be possible without your support. And so I would like to welcome all of our current members to tonight's event. Thank you for supporting our work here at Spotlight PA. I would also like to just pause a moment and ask anyone who is not yet a member, please support this important programming now. You can do it very easily at spotlightpa.org/donate. That's spotlightpa.org/donate. And it's not just events like these that you'll be supporting. You'll be supporting all of the work that we, the reporters and editors at Spotlight PA do. I want to flag specifically the Election Center that we have up now. It's full of guides on the primary elections, how to request a mail ballot, updates on all the litigation we've seen around elections in Pennsylvania. And we really are one of the only Pennsylvania outlets doing this kind of work, especially for a municipal primary election. These are important elections that don't always get the attention they deserve. And again, they are the very basic levels of government. These are local elections, court elections. So visit spotlightpa.org/elections if you want to check that out. And again, donate to support this work. It's not possible without you. And all new monthly donations will be matched at 12 times their value. And as always, your support, again, it goes directly back into the public service work that Spotlight PA does for Pennsylvania. So we can't do this without you. Thank you so much for supporting us and for coming to this event. A couple housekeeping things. We're recording the event for those who can't make it, so you can always view the event tomorrow on our website if you want to. And if you have a question for our panelists, please drop them in the Q&A section on Zoom. It's going to be at the bottom of your screen. And again, today we are discussing the Supreme Court primary elections. Those are on May 16th this year. And then in November, you will see the general elections for the Supreme Court, also for a bunch of other elections, other court elections, local ones. Today, though, we're focusing on the Supreme Court because it is Pennsylvania's court of last resort. It's one of the most politicized courts in the Commonwealth. It's also just a really, really interesting election every time there's an open seat, which there is. And I will now turn it over to another one of our government reporters, Kate Huang-Poot, to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, so I'm introducing our panelists tonight. First up, we have Kadita Kenner, who's the founder and CEO of the New Pennsylvania Project, a voting rights organization founded to expand Pennsylvania's electorate so that it reflects the state's demographics. And we also have Deborah Gross, the president and CEO of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, which is an organization dedicated to educating Pennsylvanians about the court system and how to navigate them. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I think we'll start with Deborah for the first question. If you could just please describe the format of Pennsylvania's court process and what the state's Supreme Court role is within the appellate system.
Okay, so I'm going to do this quickly because it could take long. So I know the importance of this, but in general, our Supreme Court is, I'll say, our court of last resort, right? Cases can typically start in the Court of Common Pleas or sometimes in the Commonwealth Court, and they can actually even start in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. That's a rare situation, but it does happen, and it actually happened recently within the past since COVID, because there was it's called a King's Bench petition. There was a King's Bench petition filed with respect to the powers, the governor's powers with respect to COVID. There was a King's Bench petition filed with respect to a Senate bill addressing 5 different areas. So, it is our court of last resort because it interprets our Pennsylvania's Constitution. It also has a discretionary review. So every case that gets before it doesn't, or is put before, doesn't necessarily have to take. It does have to take a mandatory review of like death penalty cases, right? There's a certain limited number of cases where there is a mandatory review. Hopefully that was not too fast, but
that was good.
Good enough.
All right. And I also want to ask after that kind of rundown. Well, I guess I can start with this. So Kate, well, let me ask you to start. So we have a bunch of Supreme Court candidates. We have 2 contested primaries. Can you very quickly run through the Democratic candidates for for the Democratic primary.
Yes. So really quickly, we just have Judge Dan McCaffrey, who's in Philadelphia, based in Philadelphia County, and is on the Superior Court. He has the Democratic endorsement, and I believe he's the person who has raised the most money in the race thus far. We also have Deborah Kunzelman, who's on Superior Court and from Beaver County. She has raised about half as much as he has and is running without endorsement. So it's very much a dark horse candidacy.
And then on the Republican side, we have Carolyn Carluccio. She's a Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas judge. She's been there since 2009. And she is the person with the Pennsylvania Republican Party endorsement, which means she has, often as it means that she has more money than her opponent. She was rated highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar Association, which is one of the kind of key factors in assessing these judges, because again, there's not a lot to go on sometimes in these primaries. She is running against Patricia McCullough, who has run for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court before. She is from Allegheny County. She serves on Commonwealth Court, and she's pretty notable because she was one of the only judges in Pennsylvania who, ruled affirmatively when Donald Trump was trying to delay certification of the election results in 2020. She allowed that case to go forward. She also notably has most of the money in her campaign account has come from Doug Mastriano, who was the Republican candidate for governor in this past election in 2022. So that gives you a sense of where she is on the political spectrum, as much as you can get a sense from judges. So then I do want to turn it to now, Khadija. When we're looking at these judges and we're looking at what they're going to probably come up against when and if they get on the court, what are some of the biggest issues that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has ruled on, and what kind of impact the rulings have had in recent years?
Yeah, thank you for holding this forum. And I say that as someone who's leading a voting rights organization, because we have so many people coming to us and saying, I don't know who to vote for, what to do. And I don't know, how do I even go about this? And so I think that it's really important for us all to recognize that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they're going to decide very urgent cases that impact all of our fundamental rights. And just in the recent past, we've already seen cases determined about our voting rights themselves. 2020, we had the provisional ballots. Our Pennsylvania Supreme Court heard that based upon one of the lead plaintiffs coming out of Delaware County, saying that she did not receive her vote by mail ballot in the mail in time to use that. And so she went to the polls and did what you're told to do, which is cast a provisional ballot, but then later received notification that her ballot was not going to be counted. And then for later, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to rule that, yes, absolutely, your vote counts. So I think that this is one of the important cases that'll be heard by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I think about education here in Pennsylvania and across the country. And I think that we know as Pennsylvanians that we have a woefully unequal way in which we fund our public school system. And I think that we're going to have to make sure that our legislators now, it's up to them at this point to make sure that we are funding schools properly, but we'll be looking to the Supreme Court to have a final say. I think about redistricting. We just got over redistricting, but it's coming up again because 2030 is just around the corner. And I think about the cases that'll be heard by the Supreme Court as it relates to our redistricting and reapportionment efforts. I think about what is happening in other states, and that could happen here in Pennsylvania, abortion access and healthcare in general. And I think that these are all things that we need to be paying attention to because they are happening across the country and they can happen here in Pennsylvania. I think about LGBTQ rights and protecting that community as well. Just many things that could be heard by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to ask just quickly as a follow-up. We saw recently the Wisconsin Supreme Court case really became a case that is centered on a lot of political hot button issues, specifically abortion. And it was seen as a really symbolic race of larger political trends. And I'm wondering, these are not races that are going to determine the makeup of and who controls the Pennsylvania Supreme Court this year. But do you expect that we're going to see that kind of, political nature to the race? Do we think people are going to be voting based on their commitment to specific issues?
It's unfortunate that we're in such politicized times that we can't always rely on our judicial system to be that beacon of hope and justice that many want to see, in these times. And I think, Pennsylvania being one of just a little more than a handful of states who vote for all of our judges in partisan elections, I think that we're going to see the rapid growth of politicization of our courts, of our appellate courts, our intermediate appellate courts in Pennsylvania. And yeah, I think we lead up into 2025 when there's going to be 3 Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices up for retention voting. Is that going to be a big thing? So it's like, let's get folks ready to vote now in 2023 so they're prepared to vote again in 2025.
I just want to, thank you very much. I just want to add one thing in that in Wisconsin, they really did focus on, the issue of abortion, and the candidates did state their positions. Here, I truly believe that the candidates will not be answering questions like that because we have, a code of judicial conduct which forbids them from answering questions on topics that will be before them.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that because that is a really notable part of Pennsylvania's judicial code of conduct. It also includes, by the way, that even though justices, they run in partisan elections, they have campaigns, they cannot ask for money specifically from donors. Their campaigns have to do that on their behalf. So again, some very specific rules that kind of shape the way that Pennsylvania's judicial campaigns are run. And then I think, Kate, you had the next question, right?
Yes, yeah. I think, Kadita, you sort of touched on some voting rights cases that the state Supreme Court handles, but could you describe a little bit further how those rulings have affected, Pennsylvanians' ability to vote, especially, the past election cycle with ballot curing and undated ballots and that whole situation?
Vote by mail has been very successful here in Pennsylvania and utilized by both parties. And I think that making sure that those who vote by mail feel secure that their vote is going to count, that their vote matters, I think that that is super important for the electorate here in Pennsylvania to understand. I think that we know that there were no legitimate fraud cases here in Pennsylvania in 2020. And it's really important that that our court continues along that vein to make sure people can feel as though their vote counts. We'll most likely see some more of this in 2024. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think that now that both major political parties realize the importance of voting by mail, hopefully that won't be something that is drawn attention to in 2024. But yeah, I think it's really important that we understand that the courts are there to protect us and protect our fundamental rights. And one of those is our voting rights and making sure that our vote counts and we feel as though it is counting.
Yeah. I want to ask both of you, because again, we talked about the fact that these justices, they cannot say how they're going to rule in a given case. They can't really take a position on specific issues. They can't solicit donations directly, but these are political elections. These people get political donations. They are supported by politicians for a reason. And I'm wondering, what are the things that you look for in trying to assess what a candidate's judicial philosophy is? How can you tell if that judicial philosophy is influenced by partisan politics? Deborah, I'd love to start with you.
So I always say the bar associations are the best place to start because they do a very thorough investigation of the candidates. They give out a questionnaire, they do an investigation, they interview, they make recommendations. As you said, you can't, they can't address a topic, right? But you can get a general understanding of a person based on, on their outside activities, what they do, how they give back to their community. If you really want to be a nerd, you can read decisions, right? All the decisions that judges and justices have issued are available on the pacourts.us website. So, I will say, many are not lone decisions, right? They're majority opinions, which means it's not necessarily only that justice, it's a group, but they're still important sources of information.
Yeah. Anything you want to add on that, Kadita?
Voting in judicial elections is probably the most difficult election to vote in for the common Pennsylvanian. They don't know who the candidates are. They may not have seen them knock on their door and talk to them about wanting to represent them in the halls of justice. And so for us, it's really important that we make sure that we're asking questions to personalize the courts. I mean, when we're traveling the state and talking about the importance of the courts, we want to personalize them by giving it perfect examples of who it is that is bringing cases to the court. And so I think some questions that we've asked in the past that have been really impactful to find out where a candidate really stands is, who is your judicial icon? Who's your favorite, United States Supreme Court justice? That'll give you a great idea of kind of where they stand on the political spectrum. And they've answered that question in a previous panel. Asking questions such as, what do you do on the weekends in your spare time? What nonprofit organizations are you spending your Saturday with? And, if you are not going to be elevated this year to this bench, what is your promise to be a public servant? How are you going to continue on in the vein of being a public servant and representing Pennsylvanians? So I think there are questions that you can ask to get to the heart of these folks that, we want to make sure are going to fully represent us.
And Deborah, if you could speak a little bit about how Pennsylvania's judicial election system is specific to Pennsylvania. We've already kind of spoken about Wisconsin. We know there have been legislative attempts to create, judicial districts. Can you talk a little bit about how the system we have affects which judges get elected and how they behave in office, and if there are any alternatives?
So at the moment, we just have elections for judges, right? And at all levels. And there's just certain requirements. I know somebody just asked a question, so I'm going to include it in my answer. Judges from common pleas court, candidates for judges from common pleas court up to the Supreme Court have to be lawyers. They don't have to be judges, right? They have, there are certain, they have to pass the bars, the Pennsylvania bar. So there are certain requirements, right, for judges. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm going back to the other question, but how many years of practice has somebody had? Have they been in the courtroom? Have they represented clients, or have they been a law clerk? We in Pennsylvania, we elect our judges. They're for 10-year terms. Kadena mentioned retention elections, so that's really important. Again, there is actually in the general election this year one retention election for Superior. So yes, two retention elections. Sorry about that, for Superior Court in the general. And again, people don't understand what that means. It's not English. It means, do you want to retain a judge? Yes or no? But still, how can I'm not a good example, but how could my sister, who's not a lawyer, understand how to retain a judge or not? We're asking people to do homework, and not just to go by a name, and not just to say decide to elect somebody from where they're from, but to actually do homework, which is, as Kadena said, it's challenging and intimidating at the same time.
Yeah. Deborah, I want to follow up on that really quickly too, because I think you and I have talked about this before. The way that Pennsylvania elects its judges, chooses its judges, is not the only way to do it. Okay. So we have statewide partisan elections. There have been people within Pennsylvania who want to move to, partisan elections within districts. But you've made the point before, and I think Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts as an organization has made the point that we could have nonpartisan elections. We could appoint judges. Again, this is not the only way.
No, we can. They actually, and the best website for people to actually understand the various methods is the Brennan Center. They have a map of various methods of selection. But Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts it supports a merit selection. But the issue is what does that mean, right? Who comprises that commission? Is it a political decision, which is not what Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts wants, but a substantive decision based on qualifications, diversity, and an entire panoply of experiences, right? So, I will tell you, we're undertaking at PMC, we have an ad hoc committee that has been studying the various methods of judicial selection. We'll be issuing a report soon. But it's been truly interesting. We've had California judges come in, New Jersey judges come in, who talk about the different methods each of their states has had.
Yeah. And I see we have a comment in there from Diane about a link to that article. I feel like the last time I talked to you about this might have been when I still worked for like WHYY or something. Dig something up. But absolutely, everyone look out for that study because I do think it's fascinating, just the different ways of doing this. And then we also had a question for Kadita. And this is really based on an article that Kate wrote recently about, the way that independent and third-party voters cannot vote in elections in Pennsylvania. Kadita, what do you think the effects are of excluding independent and third-party voters from this kind of primary election?
Yeah, being a closed primary state is difficult for those of us who are in the voter registration space, particularly during the primary season. And I think, political parties are created to get their candidates elected. And this is an opportunity during closed primaries for those who belong to one of the two major political parties, as it is right now, to choose the candidate that best represents them. So if this is someone who has similar lived experience, if this is someone who has diversity in profession, maybe they were a public defender, maybe it's a woman, maybe it is someone who lives in their neck of the woods. This is an opportunity for those to select their favorite candidate in this primary election. And for those who can't, those who are independent or the independent party or they're unaffiliated voters, they cannot. And so they have the opportunity, if they'd like, ahead of a primary to then, choose a political party, change registration, join a political party so that you can play part in one of the two major political parties and choosing a candidate. You can change back to being an independent or unaffiliated voter if you like to after the election. That's the opportunity that you have here in Pennsylvania if you want to get involved in these primary elections. But while we are a closed primary state, those who choose not to choose, select one of the two major political parties won't have a say in who that candidate will be in November. And so maybe they should think about that while you're still living in Pennsylvania in this time.
And you can still register to vote until May 1st. So make sure you register.
You can. And you can vote in special elections, even if you're not registered in a party. And you can also vote for, Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, the other thing is constitutional amendments.
Yeah, that's really important because people who are not registered as a D or an R in the primary don't come to the polls because they think they don't have to. But when there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot, it's really important. And that was actually one of the concerns Kadita and I joined together our forces with an entire group of organizations to combat a proposed bill that would, I will use the term, gerrymander the state with respect to the Supreme Court judges.
Oh, and the other thing is, because we always get questions about this. So for the 123 of you who are here today, there are no amendments on the ballot for this primary. So you don't have to worry about that in May. And we'll let you know if that changes for future elections.
There is those who live in the special election district in the Upper Darby area. They have an opportunity, if they are not choosing a political party, to vote in that special election for state representative.
Yes.
For those unaffiliated and third-party voters, you can change your registration up to 2 weeks before the elections. You still do have time. But I think we're sort of moving on now to campaign financing in state Supreme Court races. Last time around in the 2021 race, we saw that millions and millions of dollars were raised. Deborah, could you talk a little bit about how much money is typically spent on campaigning for state Supreme Court seats, if it's increased over the years, and why typically, what kind of third parties are involved in this sort of financing?
So that's an interesting question. In many years past, it was sort of a sleeper. There was not a lot of money. In 2015 or 17, and I apologize, there were 3 spots available for the Supreme Court, and so it became an expensive election. And actually, at that point in time, $6 million was raised, which was the largest amount of money raised for a Supreme Court election in the United States. We look at it now, and I will tell you that in the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat election, over $40 million was raised. So it has grown exponentially. It is being supported by, dark horses, right? PACs that we don't know who contributes. But right now, honestly, it's been kind of quiet and a sleeper, but it's the primary. So, you know, we don't know what will happen. I've been surprised, but I do think come November, we'll see some additional funds go into the Supreme Court race.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just hoping to
Thanks,
respond
Khadija.
to somebody.
It was 2015. Sorry, though.
2015. And then when we're talking about, you know, the ideology of the courts, yeah, again, the courts, especially the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, have been accused of being too ideological by people on, you know, various sides of the political spectrum. Have courts gotten more ideological? And, you know, how do you view that in the kind of, you know, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a neutral thing? Can a court be impartial? Kadita, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, this is one that's hard to answer in a couple of minutes here, right?
Philosophical.
Katie? You know, we are in highly politicized times, and I don't know if we'll ever go back to when they're not. And so I think it is difficult for us to think that human beings won't have an ideology. Yes, they are to uphold the Pennsylvania Constitution. And there are lots of changes being made to the Pennsylvania Constitution, especially of late here in the Commonwealth. And I think that we just need to make sure that they are being the arbiters they need to be to uphold the law. And if we can try to keep the dark money out of these races, perhaps we can keep some of the ideology that individuals may have at bay. But I think that we are where we are right now, and I don't see us going back, unfortunately. And I think that we all want to believe that there's equal justice for all, and that the courts will do the right things. I mean, we saw what happened when legislators were mad at the courts based upon their ruling to ensure that we didn't have gerrymandered maps. Some legislators wanted to impeach our Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices over this. So I think there's a lot of folks who have some ideologies that are in question at this moment.
Yeah, yeah. Anything to add on that, Deborah?
Actually, Khadija said it. I mean, it's, you know, because the legislature had not been pleased with some of the court's decisions, right? That's why the bill to gerrymander the seats in the Supreme Court came about. That's why there was a proposal to impeach, a justice. That's why there's a proposal on the legislature to get rid of retention elections. That's why there's a proposal in the legislature to decrease the number of years somebody is a judge. So, you know, there were a lot of threats, I will say, hanging over the justices' heads to say, answer these in the ways I want. But I truly believe that the justices, didn't listen to threats, right? And they did make decisions based on their interpretations of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you both if there were any big cases that are currently pending for the courts that you're keeping an eye on, or if you could speak to how the election might influence those.
So there's an interesting, there are two interesting cases. If you go on the court's website, it actually lists cases of specific interest, I'll say. So, and a lot of them have to do with power, okay? Is the only way to say it. So there's a case based on the proposed impeachment of the Philadelphia district attorney. There was a lawsuit by the district attorney with respect to the power of the legislature to do that. There's currently a case with respect to the decision to redact and issue a limited disclosure grand jury report. So there are, I do think that we will see something with respect to education, because I think the funding issue from the legislature, so everybody should know, the Commonwealth Court did issue a phenomenal lengthy opinion saying that Pennsylvania does not provide education in a constitutional way, I'll say, but it needs funding. So I think we will see cases, but those are the only couple that I could bring that come to my mind at the moment.
Deb, I love that you brought up the Larry Krasner one, because as someone who's, leading an organization to get folks registered to vote, who really for many reasons don't ever register to vote. That was one of them. We talk about voter suppression. And so this is some of the cases that could be heard by the court, determine whether or not we're going to suppress the votes of duly elected officials here in the Commonwealth. I think about Tennessee and the voter suppression that was going to happen there with more than 100,000 folks from Tennessee being unrepresented. And that certainly happened in the Commonwealth as well, if we're not careful.
All right. Well, I do want to get to the questions that we've been getting from our panelists, or from our people who are watching. But first, I do want to ask just both of you very briefly, anything else that we haven't covered yet that you think voters should know before Election Day? Any other, voting stuff, anything else?
It is a daunting task, right? We're all leading very busy lives. Some of us working 2 and 3 jobs and trying to put food on the table and get our kids' homework done and all of that good stuff, and trying to figure out who we want to elect to be a judge isn't at the forefront of our daily lives. And so I think this is the moment that we have to go beyond just casting a ballot. We're going to have to really take a moment, maybe use a vote by mail ballot so you can take your time with it. Sit around the dining room table with the family. Look at who it is that is trying to represent us. Maybe do a quick Google on these folks to find some information. Make it a project for your younger folks living in the house with you, to try to figure out who it is that you as a family would like to put on a bench for 10 years to represent you and your family in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So I think that we just have to find some time. We're gonna have to find this time in our day to pay attention. And there's going to be many town halls and events. I know Deb's organization will be putting on some. We'll be doing some in the communities and meeting you where you are, so that to help you, put together the pieces of who it is should I have representing me in the halls of justice for 10 years on a bench.
And so I actually want to also say that the Supreme Court judges don't just sit on the bench and write decisions, okay? So our Supreme Court has a lot of authority. It has authority over rules, rule changes, rules of evidence, criminal rules. I mean, right now, so the Supreme Court is contemplating changes in form of paupers, which means, if you can't afford certain filing fees, costs, what should be done. So there are a lot of expansive powers of the Supreme Court. Also, they oversee lawyer disciplinary, they oversee judicial conduct. So you need to know that they don't just sit on a bench, read cases, hear arguments, and make decisions, but they do have, as Khadija said, they really do have a tremendous amount of authority and impact on our everyday lives.
Absolutely. By the way, I do want to give you both a minute to, as we're kind of looking through our questions here. I think you both, Deborah and Khadija, you have events coming up, right? Do you want to briefly talk through those? Khadija, you can go first.
Yeah, we'll be putting together community conversations in your neighborhood, right? We're going to go into Norristown, Montgomery County. We're going to go into the city of Chester. We're going to be in Coatesville, and we're going to hold community conversations so that the average person who is not all into the legalese can come in and kind of learn what it is that these judges and justices do or will do. And I think that this takes some of the onus off of the candidates, right? Because if they're spending so much of their time trying to explain what it is they do, they can't really be out there telling us how they're going to impact our lives. And so I think it is really up to the grassroots groups and others to kind of provide that civic education and engagement. And so that's what we'll be doing. So if you don't, follow us on social media or sign up for our biweekly e-blast so that you'll know where we're going to be in your neighborhood. And we might show up outside a bodega. We're going to be really in your neighborhood to meet you where you are, because not everybody is going to, make the long trips to go someplace to hear things. But we want to bring it to you in your neighborhood on a level that you're going to understand, and speak to you on a level that you understand, so you can make this really important decision for you and your family.
And PMC is going to have an appellate court judicial candidate forum where all the candidates will be on. It'll be by Zoom and be asked questions. So actually, if anybody has any questions that they want asked of the appellate court judicial candidates, put them in the chat here and I'll write it down. And that'll be on May 9th at 6 p.m. It's virtually, but we also will have another candidate forum right before the general election as well. So, they're both really important opportunities to, I'll say, learn about the courts and question the judges. And then PMC will also be holding, and you can check out our website, some programs where we're going to do a podcast where we invite retired judges to explain what they do, because it's important to hear and understand what the courts do. They just don't sit up on a pedestal. Okay. They really, they do a lot, and it's important for you to understand how important they are.
All right, let's get into those questions. I think, Kate, you have the first one.
Yes, I think one of the first questions was if you guys could break down the partisan makeup of the Supreme Court and maybe speak a little bit about how that's displayed itself in rulings. Deb, do you want to take that one?
I actually am going to let Khadija handle that.
Oh,
sorry. I am a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit, and I'm staying away from that. Sorry.
All right. I'm just going to speak truth, right? So currently, right now, the makeup is there should be 7 Supreme Court justices that sit on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We have a vacancy due to the death of Justice Bear. So currently we have 6 justices sitting on the bench. 4 of them are Democrats, 2 of them are Republicans. So this current election will not sway anyway the makeup of the court in terms of it being Democrat controlled or Republican controlled. That could actually happen in 2025, which is why that election will be super important. But all elections are important, and especially this judicial election this year, very important. So that's kind of where it is right now. This election will not, flip the courts, if you want to call it that. But it could make it closer, which would allow for 2025 to be even closer.
I think that in general, though, the decisions have not always come down along party lines. And that's really important. The court really does issue decisions. I can't even predict as a lawyer how the court will decide, because there have been splits that I wouldn't expect. There have been complete unanimous decisions. So it is, I like to say, fortunately, our court really so far, really does decide cases not based on their party affiliation. And I can tell you also the judges that I know, don't want to, will not, or actually refuse to make decisions based on party affiliations.
We have a question here from Virginia. It's really just about voting logistics. So I'm glad you sent this in, Virginia. If I voted by mail in the last few years, can I assume that I will receive a vote by mail form in all of the primaries? Not necessarily. Khadija, you want to take that one?
Yeah, just because you voted by mail for the last few years does not mean that you will automatically receive a vote by mail ballot, even if you checked off that one box that said that's what you want to do. So yeah, I would recommend that you apply for a vote by mail ballot as soon as you can, as soon as it's available to you in your county, to do that at this moment.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Kate, did you have another one?
Another question we've gotten is about off-year quote unquote elections, Supreme Court elections. If you guys could talk a little bit about what the voter turnout is like in November. Historically, has this had lower voter turnout, and what off-year elections bring in voter turnout overall?
So we like to say it's an odd year, not an off year, but to not discourage voters, right? There's still many important, elections on the ballot. What I get concerned about is like Allegheny and Philadelphia counties have a lot on the ballot besides the judges. So we'll get a lot of voters in the primary who will look at the ballot, maybe ignore the judges. And then come the general, since some of those bigger cities feel as though it's already decided, they may not turn out. So typically in off-year elections, we get 20% of registered voters come out to vote for odd number years election. That means the minority of our state is making decisions for the majority. That's unacceptable.
And I'll second that with Deb there. There is definitely an opportunity in these opportunity years. I like to call them opportunity years instead of off years. This is, these local folks, these municipal folks, these judicial nominee candidates, they're making very important decisions about you and your life, where you live. And if sometimes they're more important, these elections are than the federal sexy elections that happen in even years. So I would encourage everybody to make sure you come out in this opportunity year and cast a ballot for pathonetary and for your judicial candidates and tax collector and all the things that you're going to see on your ballot this May and this November.
Yeah, we did have a question. This is really a policy question. It's from Ralph G. And I kind of don't know the answer to this. I think Kate might know more than I do, but I'll throw this out anyway because I think it's interesting. Ralph's asking about a Republican effort to prevent Pennsylvania from joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative through some sort of constitutional means. First, I want to just ask Kate to clarify, kind of explain a little bit more what the background of that is.
Yeah, sure. So the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is essentially an agreement between, I believe, about 12 other states that we will cap and trade carbon and sell within each other between those 12 states. So it's sort of almost like using a different form of currency, and it's meant to reduce carbon emissions between those 12 states. Currently, Governor Wolf tried to get us to join, and there was an injunction to stop that process because the legislature essentially complained that he did so in a way that violates his executive power. That case, I believe, I don't want to predict when it's going to come out, but it's been ongoing, and that is one line of argument. The newer line of argument that's sort of we've been hearing in budget hearings even is that because the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is an agreement, or a compact is the legal term, between multiple different states under the federal constitution, that's not permissible. So it's a little bit of both Pennsylvania Constitution and federal constitution, yet them all.
See, I knew Kate knew about it. Katina or Deborah, are either of you watching this? Anything you would want to add about that?
It hasn't gotten to the court yet, is the only way to say it. So I honestly haven't, I can't say how it would apply to any elections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a bunch of comments too about school boards, which is obviously not related to the courts, but just to flag that, yeah, there's a lot of interest in school boards. There's been a kind of unusual amount of money in recent years going into school board races, and those are also on the ballot this year. So if you're interested in how your schools are running, absolutely, that's another great reason to go out to the polls this year. Looking for some other questions.
Yeah, I think there was a question about foreign languages. If you're voting in Spanish, or I think the other languages mentioned were Ukrainian or Creole, like what kinds of resources are out there to educate yourself about who you want to vote for, but also on election day when you're at the ballot place, at the polling place, what sort of procedures there are there.
Accessibility is a huge challenge here in the Commonwealth. Language accessibility. There are lots of Pennsylvanians whose primary language is not English, and we need to make sure, and they are citizens, and they are eligible to vote, and they are registered to vote, and they need to be communicated with. And so I would recommend getting involved in some grassroots organizations across the Commonwealth. I think about immigrant right organizations such as Make the Road and CASA, who do great work in engaging immigrant communities. APIPA, engaging the Asian Pacific Islander community here in Pennsylvania, to make sure that you get this information in a language that is preferable to you, so that you can make a good decision for yourself and cast a ballot. I think that there's only a few languages and a few counties in which Pennsylvania is required to have ballots in several languages. Spanish being one, English, and then traditional Chinese, I think, is the other. And so it's really important that, you're going to have to do a little work here and find an organization that is going to help you get the assistance you need to access this ballot in a language in which you prefer to understand this information. So yeah.
All right. I think that is all the major questions, so we can start wrapping up. But before we do, I do want to just go through a couple important dates and remind everybody about our election center. We have a lot of resources, so just a guide of important dates, as I mentioned. We have a great look that Kate and our other government reporter, Stephen Caruso, did at the candidates' campaign finance reports, which is very, I think, illustrative about who supports them and what people are hoping to get out of these elections. We have, again, bios of all the candidates, kind of a view of their histories judicially. So if that's of interest, please check it out. And before we leave you all, again, some important dates. So the primary election is on May 16th. You can register to vote until May 1st. You have until May 9th to request a mail ballot. And we have, again, guides kind of walking you through the mail ballot process, making sure your mail ballot gets counted. So I would, again, encourage you to check those out. And you can also find more information on PennsylvaniaStormwaterReports.com. And, Yasmin's linking a bunch of other great resources in the chat. So unless there is anything else, Deborah or Kadita, anything else, any parting words for any of our participants today?
So the only thing I'll say is that we're here talking about the Supreme Court, right? It is a very important court. I'm not going to take anything away from it, but there are many other judicial elections up on, that will be on the ballot. In Philadelphia, there are 10 Court of Common Pleas vacancies. So you will see a lot of judges on the ballot, as well as, one Commonwealth Court judge and 2 Superior Court judges. So you can go to the Bar Association, the Philadelphia Bar Association, the Allegheny County, the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and they're all listed on our website for information about each of these candidates. And I encourage you to do your homework.
And I second that, Deb, and I'll say that the courts matter and we must vote in judicial elections. If we are going to continue to have partisan judicial elections in Pennsylvania, we need to vote in them, and everyone needs to vote in them, not just 20% of the electorate. Let's get up there to, these even year numbers. Let's get to 70% voter turnout. We can do this. Let's make it a habit here. We have various ways for everyone to cast a ballot now. While we're still fighting for things like same-day voter registration and we're fighting for automatic voter registration, let's do the things that we can do. Let's request a vote by mail ballot. Take your time with it. Again, sit around the kitchen table with your family. Make a good decision for yourself. If you live in Philadelphia or even Chester County, your ballot is going to be super long this year. You might need a cup of coffee while you're sitting there and fill that thing out. So take your time with it. And, Google is your friend as well to get, go to some reputable sources, League of Women Voters and others that will provide you some nonpartisan information so that you can make a good decision for yourselves. Please don't stay home just because it's a primary election, particularly those of you who live in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. This is a big one. So let's make sure we're all out here casting our ballot while we still have the right to do so.
All right. On that note, thank you so much to both Deborah and Kadita. Really wonderful information as always. You guys are fonts of knowledge. And you can find out more of our events if you care to tune in, which I encourage you to do at spotlightpa.org/topics/events. You can also email questions or comments to Yasmin Piper, our wonderful events coordinator, who did a great job with this one and does a great job with all of our events. And again, thank you so much to all of the people who support Spotlight PA. It is much, much appreciated. It really makes all of this possible. If you don't support Spotlight PA yet, I encourage you to do so. And we will be back very soon with lots of other good events. But until then, thanks so much. Have a great night. Enjoy the weather.